My sister called my son a bastard in front of everyone. I quietly rewrote Dad's will and watched her world collapse. My sister called my son a bastard in front of everyone at Dad's 70th birthday. It was loud, sudden, and the room went dead quiet. People stared. My mother froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. Dad lowered his eyes and didn't look up. My son started to cry, and I scooped him up without thinking. My sister kept talking like she hadn't just cut him in half with one word. She accused my wife of cheating, said the baby wasn't mine, said the family shouldn't be forced to babysit a mistake. I said nothing then because screaming in front of grandparents would only make it worse for my kid. But I remember every word like a recording that played on repeat for days. Before that night, my sister and I were already tightrope close. She'd been asking Dad for money for years. Car repairs, tuition for a friend, rent for a month that turned into a year. Dad always gave her cash without paperwork because she'd cry and call herself hopeless. Dad paused before he paid. He always called me and asked my opinion. I tried to be reasonable. I suggested budgeting or job leads. She called me controlling. She started baiting me at family events. Small digs about how I wasn't earning enough, how I'd been too proud to accept help. I brushed it off as sibling rivalry until the bastard word split the room. After the dinner, people clustered in corners, whispering. My mother chased my sister out to the driveway and begged her to stop. My father sat alone at the table and tapped his fingers like he was running a list in his head. I left with my son and drove aimless until his hiccups slowed. On the drive, I replayed Mom's face when my sister said that word. Things started getting worse when my son asked why his uncle hated him. He was 5 and had never heard a word like that before. I promised him it wasn't true, that family sometimes said stupid things when they were angry. That night, I found a voicemail from Dad I hadn't expected. He asked me to come over first thing in the morning. He sounded small on the message. When I got to his house, he led me to the den and closed the door. He said he was tired of watching people take advantage of him. He said he was tired that my sister always left with cash and a smile and left me with the repairs and guilt. Then he slid an envelope toward me and asked if I could take care of things when he was gone. Dad had done this before, in little ways, asking me to handle his paperwork, sign forms when his hands shook. This time the envelope had a lawyer's name and a set of notarized papers. Dad's will had been updated 3 weeks earlier. The main beneficiary had changed. My name was on the top line, with a trust set up for my son. My sister's name was gone. I said his name wrong at first, like it would make the paper less real. Dad explained he woke up from a bad dream and thought about how my sister spent his savings, pretending it was for emergencies. He said he wanted to make sure the money went to someone who looked after the family, not just took from it. He asked me not to say anything yet because he didn't want drama while he still enjoyed the garden. I left with the envelope in my coat pocket and my head buzzing. I didn't applaud or gloat. I just felt a cold, steady thing settle in my chest. I started saving emails and texts that night. My sister had been messaging Dad daily with requests and vague threats. Dad forwarded some of them to me over the next week, asking if I thought any were unreasonable. Some asked for $5,000 here, $7,000 there, and one asked for the car title. She called once asking Dad to sign a power of attorney because her landlord was threatening to evict her. Dad told me he refused because she refused to show receipts for past loans. Each forwarded message was a new line in a ledger I didn't ask to keep. Things escalated when I found bank transfers. Dad had written a note and tucked it in an old cookbook naming dates and amounts he'd given her over 5 years. The numbers added up to more than most families would lend anyone. He had dated and initialed each note like it was a receipt. Dad said he kept them to remind himself not to be manipulated. When I showed the lawyer the notes, she said, they were useful. She said clear patterns mattered if anyone tried to challenge the will later. I didn't want to think about a legal fight, but I started to prepare because my sister had a temper, and we both knew she would not accept being cut out quietly. The next family dinner was 5 days later. My sister arrived with new earrings and a poise that screamed revenge. She cornered Dad at the sink and asked why she wasn't included in his new plans. Dad said he preferred to keep it private and that he'd make sure everyone had what they needed. She laughed like she'd been slapped and stormed toward the dining table. That night she made a show of calling all the relatives, asking who else would inherit. When no one answered, she started telling people at the party that Dad was senile and I had brainwashed him. She accused me of coercing him into changing the will to spite her. Her voice rose and people watched it like a soap opera. 2 cousins texted me later saying they believed her and that she always had a flair for dramatic. So maybe I had been unfair. I printed those texts and put them in a folder with Dad's notes. I started making copies of everything. My lawyer told me to keep quiet and let the will do the work. He said the fewer fireworks, the better. I had no idea how true that would be. A week after the will update, Dad's health took a sharp turn. He fell and broke his hip and went into the hospital faster than we could prepare. He floated between lucidity and confusion for days. I sat at his bedside and read him articles about the garden he'd planted. He nodded and smiled on good hours and drifted on lousy ones. During one lucid afternoon, he took my hand and whispered something I hadn't expected. He told me to make sure my son had school paid for, that he wanted him to go to college. He said to be firm and not let the family mess eat me alive. I said I would. Dad died 2 weeks later. The funeral was heavy and exact like you might expect. My sister cried louder than anyone, changing from regretful to theatrical at the drop of a hat. After the graveside, people drifted toward the house for the will reading. My stomach turned into a knot as the lawyer stood with the envelope. I watched my sister because she kept smiling like she already had the check. The lawyer read the will and my name came up with the trust for my son. My sister's smile froze. Then the lawyer read the clause. Dad had insisted on a letter to be opened if anyone contested. My sister's color drained from her face like someone had turned off a lamp. She lunged up and demanded to see the letter. She accused me of rigging everything. Her voice shook, but she shouted and finger-pointed and made a spectacle. The lawyer slid the sealed letter across the table and let her open it in front of the same cousin she'd been trying to win over. The letter was Dad's precise handwriting. He had detailed every loan, every time she paid him back with excuses, and then later with new debts. He'd listed dates, he thought she'd lied about job interviews, and times she had shown up at his house smelling of cheap alcohol. He had also written a paragraph explaining that he had wanted to leave the main estate to people who would use it to build stability for his grandchildren. My sister read the letter out loud, and people went quiet. That was the moment I realized how much sway paper had over family gossip. Her face was a mask that changed every sentence. At the end, she slammed the letter shut and accused me of fabrication. She demanded the lawyer confirm the note's authenticity. The lawyer showed the notary stamps and the dates. He confirmed everything legally valid. Then my sister did something I hadn't expected. She stormed out and started calling every relative who possibly could be on her side. She threatened to contest the will immediately. She started telling cousins that I had pushed Dad into signing while he was confused. That I had used his failing health to get a big payday. Old family friends texted and asked if it was true. I sent them copies of Dad's signed notes and the notary records. I sent the lawyer's contact information again and said I'd let the court sort this if she wanted. The next escalation came faster than I thought. My sister filed for an emergency injunction claiming undue influence. She asked the court to freeze the estate until the hearings. The clerk called to tell me she'd filed, and that a temporary freeze was possible. I didn't panic. I printed every document Dad had given me. The lawyer and I filed the originals, the custody trust paperwork for my son, and Dad's doctor statements about his competency when he signed the will. We hired experts and got affidavits about the notarization process. 3 weeks later, the judge denied her emergency motion. He said the will had been notarized properly and there was evidence of Dad's intent. The hearing on the contest was scheduled for months out. But for now, the assets were released to the estate. That was when the real collapse started. My sister's lifestyle depended on the hope the money would come. She'd been living beyond means and had bills that were quietly due in the months ahead. Her landlord sent a notice that rent was overdue and that eviction proceedings would start in 30 days. Her car was repossessed, and a finance company called demanding payment. People she'd borrowed money from started asking about repayment because now they realized she might not have cash.